Chapter 5. What Gets You Depressed? Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. There is a national depression today similar to the statement by Macbeth. We're all playing our parts, doing what's expected, but for what? Where are we going anyway? What's the use? Soon we'll be gone, heard from no more. In the past 20 years, I have observed increasingly more depressed people than I ever thought possible. Everyone who has a problem is depressed to some degree. People with marriage conflicts are depressed. Parents with rebellious teens are depressed. Patients with incurable diseases are depressed. The word depressed literally means pressed down, or as my mother would say, just not up to snuff. Picture a foam rubber pillow and then push your fist into the center. The pillow is depressed. It's not up to its usual bounce. Pull your hand out, and then the pillow pops up. This is a simple example of a mild depression, that pervasive feeling that we're somehow not functioning at our usual capacity. There's not one of us that's not pressed down occasionally as we strut and fret our hour upon the stage, and some of us may sense that someone is standing on our pillow and trampling us underfoot. As depression overtakes us, we begin to have feelings of helplessness followed by hopelessness. If I can't help myself, then there's no hope. In my book, Blow Away the Black Clouds, I give the symptoms of depression and some solutions, both self-directed and spiritual. This has been my best-selling book, and I have just revised it to add an analysis of teen depression and suicide, some suggestions for the healing of pains of the past, and a chapter on Christmas depression. The one area I have not covered is the different causes of depression according to a person's temperament pattern. Since we now understand the desires and underlying needs of each personality, we can see how these traits relate to depression, that feeling of inner loss. As we view the sanguine's desire for fun and need for attention and approval, we can easily guess at what depresses them. Even though they are optimistic people with an above-average ability to bounce back from adverse circumstances, if they find themselves in a position where life is no longer fun and where no one is giving them attention or approval, they will become depressed. As the cholerics innately seek control and need appreciation for their achievements, they drop into depression when they find life out of control with no one applauding their good deeds. The phlegmatics just want peace and need to feel that someone considers them worthwhile, so when they are dropped into a cauldron of constant contention and controversy and can't face the conflict, they drown in depression. Because the melancholies have the deepest natures to begin with and want the most out of life, they are the most easily disappointed. Because they are aiming for perfection in both themselves and others, and because they expect those others to be sensitive to their inner feelings, they are laid open for frequent bouts of depression. When perfection is the goal, disappointment is often the result. Since the sanguine and melancholy usually marry each other, they are doomed for depression if they don't understand each other's personalities. The sanguine needs praise and the melancholy won't give it until the sanguine is perfect. The sanguine isn't ever going to get perfect, so he doesn't get the compliments he desires, and he quits trying. When the sanguine performs more poorly than usual, the melancholy gets depressed, and the sanguine goes out to find someone who will appreciate him. When these two can see each other's weaknesses as part of their opposite natures and accept them, this frees the offending person to put his strength into improvement and not use it all up on defense and depression. Sanguine depression. A sanguine deprived of fun and attention may become depressed. After speaking at a luncheon and explaining the underlying needs of each personality, I was surrounded by people who suddenly realized why they were depressed. One sanguine lady told me of her husband, the leader of a large Christian organization. She explained he had married her for her bright personality and sense of humor, and then had worked to eliminate all her creativity and zest for life. He told her she was trivial, superficial, and self-centered, while he was deep, intellectual, and concerned for others. With his superior abilities, he had worked his way up Jacob's ladder to the top of his denomination, priding himself on his spirituality, while totally ignoring her personal needs. As she told me her story, I could see before me a typical depressed sanguine, one whose greatest abilities were considered as faults, whose joy of life had been stamped out, who received no praise from her husband. She was pretty but overweight, another sign of sanguine depression. When life is no longer fun, cheer yourself up with hot fudge sundaes. She realized as she poured her heart out to me that the reason she worked full-time was twofold. One, she had to get out and find people who would praise her. Two, she had to earn money to be able to buy the things that would pull her up from her sanguine depression. If only I could have talked with her husband and explained her innate needs, so simple to fill. Shown him she was normal to crave praise and dislike constant criticism, and taught him that the root of her depression was not a spiritual problem, but the fact that he, a well-known Christian leader, wasn't willing to meet his wife's emotional needs, or even consider she had any. Another sanguine lady sought relief from her headaches, and after much questioning by different doctors, was shown that these pains appeared only on days when her husband took her car to work, and she was left without easy transportation. She was wide-eyed as she told me her pains were produced by the depressing realization that she couldn't go anywhere for the whole day, and by the unacknowledged anger she had for her husband's leaving her wheelless. When she found the source of her problem, she was able to laugh about it and share her recovery with me. She explained, "It wasn't that I needed to go anywhere every day, but just the thought that I couldn't get out if I wanted to had me close to sick." When she stopped complaining about headaches, her husband became willing to carpool and leave her the car. Anyone that's not sanguine would find this case to be ridiculous, but those who are can relate to that need for the easy accessibility of fun and for the constancy of an applauding audience. As I talk with sanguine women, I find that their most consistent cure for depression is to go shopping. The basic negative to this program is that the sanguine is usually married to a melancholy who can count, and when the bills come in, he gets depressed. Marita and I both love to take an hour here and there across the country and go shopping. Even when we need absolutely nothing, we love to look. Cholerics consider the shopping without goals to be a waste of time, melancholies feel these forays are without purpose, and phlegmatics find these wanderings to be too much like work. But for the typical sanguine woman, just looking thank you can be the upper in a down day. One rationalized it this way: even if I do buy something to cheer me up, it's cheaper than a psychiatrist. In USA Today, an article, The Lure of the Store, examined the attitudes of different celebrities about shopping. Singer Jennifer Holliday said, "I love shopping for shoes with a passion. I feel that shopping has numerous psychological benefits in that it can provide consolation in times of depression, and on the other hand, it can provide ultimate reward in time of success. Everyone should go shopping." Well, maybe not everyone, but for sanguines, just knowing they can get to a sale provides consolation in time of depression. When sanguine men get depressed because work is no fun, or the wife doesn't laugh at their jokes, or a check just bounced, contrary to logic, they go out and treat everyone in sight. They must be accepted by their friends, and buying their way to popularity is one method of cheering themselves up, while denying there is any problem. Melancholy wives find it hard to imagine that their sanguine husbands can so easily transfer negatives into out of sight, out of mind, that they can sign up for a lifetime membership in Jack LaLanne when the Cadillac is about to be repossessed, that they can go off on an important business trip when they have no business. One frustrated wife told me of her sanguine phlegmatic husband who was a builder. The new homes hadn't sold, and the bank kept calling and insisting he get down there immediately. She was deeply depressed over the embarrassing situation, for as a melancholy she could see that nothing was going right. As she went into the office to beg him to go to the bank, she found him happily typing. When she asked, "What are you doing typing at a time like this?" he replied, "I'm writing a novel." In just telling me the story, she burst into tears. She had never been in a long-range depression of humiliation as the bank foreclosed on the houses, and he had been discouraged for a while, but had abandoned his literary career for a new venture manufacturing air-conditioned doghouses. The thought of another financial risk had her distraught, but he was happy because he'd managed to get financing from a rich man he'd met while playing golf. Besides buying clothes, treating everyone in sight, and starting new ventures, another way the sanguine handles depression is to overeat. Somehow the pleasure of pasta and petits fours picks up their spirits. Unfortunately, this momentary lift doesn't last, for the sanguine loves clothes and gets additionally depressed when nothing seems to fit right anymore. To solve this, a new wardrobe is needed, giving reason for more shopping. One Sanguine I met has 3 separate wardrobes hanging in her closet, one in size 8, one in 10 to 12, and one in 14. As she ate chocolate donuts while telling me the story, she laughed and said, "The size 8 is pure history." Sanguines are very circumstantial people, and while they may drop into a depression when the fun slows down and they are no longer in the center of the tension, a change of scene or outlook will help them bounce back again. While growing up and becoming responsible would be a better choice, it is unlikely without a clear revelation from the Lord. Remember, a sanguine without a spotlight may become lonely and depressed. Choleric depression. A choleric without control becomes depressed. This concept has opened the eyes of many women as to why their outgoing, optimistic, goal-oriented husbands have totally changed their personalities. A 50-year-old woman came up after a seminar to tell me about her husband, a choleric with some melancholy, the director of an engineering unit. He had always been a healthy, dynamic man until he went for a routine physical and found he had a degenerative eye problem. Even though his vision had not bothered him to that point, he instantly changed and began saying things such as, "What good will I be with no sight? An engineer who can't see might as well be dead. They'll fire me any day now. I might as well quit and die." His wife was so stunned by this crybaby attitude that she didn't know what to do. He sits around at home and drinks, and he started to smoke. These are 2 habits that the doctor told him would make his eyesight worse, and yet when I tell him that, he gets mad at me. She explained how angry she was at him and how she'd pulled away from him emotionally. These moves have obviously affirmed to him that she doesn't love him in his time of need. When she heard me say a choleric who is physically disabled often gets depressed, she brightened up and exclaimed, "Now I see the problem. He's got both of the choleric causes for depression, a disease that will destroy his eyesight, and the fear that he will lose his job. He sees a future where he will have no control. Now that I understand what's wrong with him, I can be more compassionate and encouraging." Another lady who was standing in line waiting to see me spoke up and said, "I can't believe this coincidence. My husband has got eye problems too, and he's in a depression. He got fired from his executive position while he was in the hospital having eye surgery. He was so upset that his blood pressure went up, complicating his recovery. Since he's come home, he's become addicted to Pepsi Cola and he eats Oreos by the bag. If I hide them, he goes to the store and buys more. He's gained weight and looks awful. He's developed a speech impediment, and he's no longer even polite to the waitresses." Here was a typical description of a depressed choleric man, both physically disabled and unemployed. Many healthy men also get discouraged at the mere thought that they might not be eternally invincible. They see no realistic challenges, and they're afraid they're going downhill. I feel that many midlife crises are caused by men who sense they may be losing their grip, their hair, their shape, their macho image, or their sex appeal. To overcome this fear, they tighten the reins at home, start rubbing Miracle-Gro into their scalps, join a health spa and buy jogging suits, lease a Mercedes and take the secretary out to lunch. What they're saying is, "I've got to do everything I can to make sure life doesn't slip out of my control. I've got to prove myself that I'm a man." How many Christian homes I've seen destroyed by a choleric man who feels no one at home appreciates all he's done for them, and who reaches out for something to restore his slipping self-confidence. In strutting his stuff, he finds a friend who makes him feel like a man again, and he walks away from his family. An understanding of the personalities is so important in a marriage, for without it, both partners may be depressed and not understand why they tend to think the marriage is failing, and a new mate might make the difference. Without any new concept of their temperaments, changing partners just moves the actors to a new stage, but the plot remains the same. A California marriage therapist warns, remarrying on the rebound is self-defeating. Unless one takes the time to learn something from the collapse of the first marriage that will make the second stronger, he or she is likely to repeat the destructive behavior or pick another unsuitable partner. Choleric women tend to marry phlegmatic men and unconsciously take control of them and the children. As long as everyone has an obedient attitude, the mother stays happy. But when any one of the group rebels, she may become depressed. Without a knowledge of her temperament, she won't understand what's wrong. One lady handed me a note ripped out of a spiral binder. Today you gave me the answer I've searched for years. I'm terribly depressed. I can't remember when I haven't been. It's been so long. I now see it's my 18-year-old son that I have held down for years and tried to make into a different personality from what he was meant to be. He hasn't turned out right now, and I see why. I didn't know about these personalities, and I've been pushing him in the wrong direction. I couldn't understand why he was so different, and he's had me depressed for years. Now I see that it's because I couldn't get him under control. I didn't think I needed the seminar, but I was wrong. I pray I can use this information correctly. Thank you so much. Dale and Sherry came to me with their problems after one of our classes. They had each done their personality profiles. He came out phlegmatic with some sanguine, and she choleric with some melancholy. Dale was handsome, charming, and laid back as he sprawled in the most comfortable chair. Sherry was sitting straight, almost grid, and she looked angry. Even if they had not shown me their scores, I would have known what their personalities were. The question they came to ask was whether or not he should give up his job and go into full-time Christian service. I started with him by asking an appropriate question for a phlegmatic sanguine man. Do you have any problems with handling money? Before he could take a breath, she answered his question. He's impossible with money, and I can make more money in a day than he can make in a week. Just this one outburst gave me a quick view of their marriage, an easygoing, friendly man who was viewed as incompetent by his choleric wife. When she finished her statement, Dale asked me, Why did you start with a money question? How'd you know? Because phlegmatic, sanguine men frequently have money problems. As I heard their story, I heard nothing new. Dale had shifted jobs at least twice a year in the 8 years they'd been married. He got bored easily, and several of the jobs were just too much like work. Because of his cool charm, he could always get a new one, and he lived on dreams of what might be. Sherry jumped in. He had one decent job, and while he had that, we got out of debt for the one and only time in our marriage. But it was so boring. It was a government job where you just did the same thing day after day. It was no fun. Does everything have to be fun to you? Don't you ever think of us? Don't you feel any obligation to support your family? With this outburst, Sherry banged her fist on the table and Dale turned to me. Do you see what it's like to live with her? It's impossible. I might not be so impossible if I could pay the bills. Tell her what you're doing now. The her was me, and I listened while he explained that he was in sales, but he didn't realize before he took the job that there was no draw, and he wouldn't receive any money until he sold a whole room full of office furniture. Since he hadn't sold so much as a desk in 3 months, there had been no income. Sherry jumped in. Didn't you even ask them before you took the job? I just assumed. You always just assume. The worst thing is he thought he was going to make a lot of money, and we bought a new house on his anticipated income. Now we have high payments and no money. If he didn't charge so much, we might be able to make it. I only charged to show you what a mess you've put us in. If it weren't for the 3 kids, I'd go to work and show you up, and I wouldn't just assume. I'd get paid. At this point, I decided to step in for a commercial. Here were 2 Christian people who were both depressed and who couldn't carry on a civil conversation in front of an audience of one. Sherry, the choleric, was desperate because life was out of control, and Dale, the phlegmatic sanguine, was sick of constant conflict. Sherry had come from an affluent family, and she wanted Dale to be like her successful father. She had goaded him on and was partly responsible for his changing jobs so often. She had also been the one who wanted the new house and had encouraged him to buy it at a point when he had no fixed income. She constantly berated him and reminded him of how much she could make if he hadn't struck her with these 3 children. Can you imagine how the children felt? Dale was tired of being badgered and admitted he only came home to see the children. He had a poor grasp of money and didn't care if he ever got rich. There was no chance of his getting rich with his low income and her high style. As I showed them what typical problems they had and did a little arithmetic with them, they began to see their mutual responsibilities for the depression they were in and the destruction they were bringing to their home. I learned that she was an excellent typist, but she had refused to do any work because I didn't want to make it easy for him, and she hadn't. He agreed to get a job with a steady income, at least until they caught up, even if it was boring. She then became willing to do some typing in her office to help him make the payments on the big house she felt she needed. They saw that they had been on opposing teams, and they determined to stop undermining each other and get on the same side. Sherry understood that in her mind, her depression came from his lack of achievement and his inability to give her what she wanted, but that underneath she was angry because she couldn't control him and all his jobs. Because her underlying need to be appreciated for all she's done for him had not been met, she had quit helping him at all. With no help or encouragement, he had been unable to achieve and was facing daily conflict that he didn't know how to handle. His underlying need to be considered a person of worth had not even been considered, and she took pleasure in putting him down. After laying out a realistic plan for them, I complimented them both on their acceptance of this new solution, and then prayed with them before leaving. On the way out, I said to Sherry, "Dale's so adorable. If you don't watch out, he'll find some woman who will be glad to support him." He replied, "If I weren't a Christian, I had already left." Too many have already left, often because they don't understand either themselves or their partners. They are depressed and don't know why, and they've grown up in a society that said, "If it doesn't work, throw it away." A few months later, I received a letter from Sherry telling me how they'd pulled their marriage together through mutual understanding and support. At the end, she said, "I realized later that you'd never answered our original question about whether we should go into full-time Christian service. I'm looking back, I can see why. We didn't have our own life in order. How did we think we could shape up others? I see now that Dale wanted an escape into ministry, and I wanted a Christian excuse for why we are losing our house. I hope God has a sense of humor." Remember, a choleric out of control, unappreciated, or sick may become depressed. Phlegmatic depression. As we have seen with Sherry and Dale, cholerics get depressed when they don't have control or don't receive appreciation for the good works they've done. The phlegmatic sinks into despair when he faces daily conflict or contention and concludes he is not worth, as my phlegmatic mother often said, a pinch of snuff, a row of pins, a tinker's dam, or the powder to blow him to thunder. Because the phlegmatic is a low-key person who is not pushy or pretentious, others often overlook him and don't bother to pull him into the conversation. Although the phlegmatic doesn't appear to mind being ignored, there comes that day when he asks himself, "What am I doing here? If no one seems to need me, why don't I find someone who will really care?" Where the choleric male in midlife goes into a crisis when he feels he may be losing his grip, the phlegmatic is groping for some significance. By midlife, he looks around at his children, who only speak to him when they want money, and his wife, who is busy running whatever she can get a hold of, including him, and he suddenly wants out. He wants out of crisis into coasting, out of insignificance into somebody, out of subordination into some kind of control. The phlegmatic control is a different breed from the cholerics, in that he doesn't want to climb mountains or join a wrestling team. He just wants to feel that he could do something his way once in a while. This midlife shift of attitude, or display of a suppressed attitude, may take the phlegmatic's wife by surprise, as he's never appeared to even care before. However, if she does not see these symptoms of depression as significant and help him to feel he's a substantial member of the family, he may find someone who will. Do you remember the Peter principle that says we all tend to rise to our own level of incompetence? For the phlegmatic, this applies when he rises from a peaceful position where he performed well to a place of perpetual problems. Although a phlegmatic stays content in almost any state, when put in a spot where he has to face controversy each day and has to fire an occasional orphan, he may sink into a depression which even he doesn't admit or understand. Strangely, the phlegmatic can handle conflict if he is not personally threatened, and he makes the best mediator or arbiter between factious cholerics. He is an excellent counselor, giving objective views to other people's problems, but he doesn't want to be the center of the controversy or be told by someone else to change his ways. A phlegmatic mother is the very best at adaptability, and in keeping her head when all are about losing theirs. However, she is easily threatened by a choleric child who finds sport in controlling mother. Usually the husband is a choleric, whose very word causes the child to shape up and the mother to feel helpless. She wonders, what is wrong with me? Why can't I handle this child? Why is he out to get me? Oh, woe is me. If the choleric partner understands the phlegmatic's problem with control and conflict and wishes to be of help, he will provide his discipline in cooperation with the mother, and not in contrast, but left to his own. The choleric will take charge of the child, exclude the mate, and make both her and her offspring see her as incompetent. Piecing this puzzle together, it's easy to see why the phlegmatic parent often feels betrayed by the choleric mate and overwhelmed by the children. This combination of conflict and insignificance leads the phlegmatic into depression. One couple that came to Fred and me following a marriage seminar were both depressed. She was choleric and he was phlegmatic melancholy, and the understanding of their differences started them on the road to a healed and happy marriage. Guinea started the action and Wally responded. She wrote, I guess I so desperately want this marriage to be great because it's my first and only marriage and it is Wally's third. Both his other wives left him, and although I can see why, those things would never prompt me to divorce. Murder, maybe. You really opened my eyes in your seminar. I always had deep inside wanted to know why his other marriages failed, hoping to prevent the same tragedy in ours. I've tried to chart out his two other wives, and they were both choleric and could not take the slow-moving pace of a phlegmatic who seemed to never get ahead. They both left for other good-looking men and more money. Wally's so kind and phlegmatic he never would tell me really why. He used to always say he never understood why they left. During each marriage, he gained up to nearly 300 pounds. Well, here he's married another choleric, me. I don't see his past as the tragedy he does. I say, move on, forget it. The Lord put me in your life. His income has doubled in 4 years, and we've started an additional business, and he seemed happier than ever in his life. But these old destructive traits keep cropping up on him. He's just recently become vice president of a huge management company, but has put on 71 pounds since we married. Of course, the obesity affects every area of our life. Sometimes I feel I need some kind of a chart to have Wally live by. He's a little melancholy, but he's too phlegmatic to fill in the chart. I see that I won't always be able to have my way, but at least I'll still have Wally. He's so good to me, so patient, all those wonderful things phlegmatics are, but because he does not see results from his efforts, he feels a failure. I know he doesn't need another choleric wife to drive him into the ground and then walk off in disgust. We love each other so much, and with the knowledge of our different personalities, I know we'll make it. Even though Fred and I put our marriage back together, through the understanding of the different personalities, we are still amazed and thrilled when others let us know what has happened to them. One woman who had been to our personality plus several years ago came again and heard what I had added about depression. She then wrote, as outstanding as the material was for me before, it is even more beneficial now. 3 weeks ago, my husband was dismissed unexpectedly from his job of 24 years. With my choleric personality, I want to get right in with investigating all possible careers and franchises and then move into a decision. But my phlegmatic husband, so afraid of change and the unknown, keeps dragging his heels. Understanding temperaments is helping me to sit on myself and choose to trust God with my husband and our future rather than pushing him to do things my way. I know that once he makes a decision, it will be a good one and he will do well in it. But it is hard watching him move at his pace rather than in mine. He's a wonderful balance for me with my eager, let's get it moving attitude, and understanding this has kept me from getting depressed. Remember, a phlegmatic facing conflict and feeling insignificant may become depressed. Melancholy depression. The reason I have left the melancholy depression to the last is because it is the classic case of what we all think of as depression. It's not so circumstantial as the sanguines or phlegmatics, and it's opposite from the cholerics. The choleric hates sickness and will work to his dying day, while the melancholy is apt to gather up ailments during depression and in extreme cases simply takes to the bed in a bid for sympathy and sensitivity. A lady came up to me recently and explained, "My mother is melancholy and depressed. She doesn't work anymore and she seems to go from one ailment to another. She has had blood tests, liver tests, and x-rays of all her parts. Is she really sick?" What a question for me, who has never seen the sick lady and who is not a doctor. However, a calculated guess would be that she is depressed and has focused her attention on her health, hoping someone will care enough about her to listen to her symptoms and be sensitive to her needs. The melancholies are depressed more frequently than other types because their deep desires to get everything and everybody in perfect order. Since this nirvana never comes, the melancholy either has to lower his expectations and accept life as it is, or sink into despair. How many of us have ever had our house perfectly decorated, our tulips in bloom, and all our buttons sewed on at the same time? The melancholy depression is harder to pinpoint because it is a generalized feeling not caused ostensibly by any particular event or deprivation. Things just aren't right, and don't look as if they ever will be, because the melancholy is innately sensitive and is easily hurt. He has no trouble remembering the negatives which, when filed in the mind, become heavy and depressing. A choleric woman wrote to tell me about administering our personality profile to her family. "What a time we had with your test. My choleric father loved it and told my mother that she was phlegmatic. She believed him because it was easier than doing the test. And what does it matter anyway? My melancholy sister-in-law opened up to us for the first time in 7 years. She said it was the only time she'd ever felt we cared about her feelings or thought we'd listen. We apologized, which is not easy for cholerics. 2 weeks later, my husband's family came, and we had to break up fights over the test. The cholerics started telling the melancholies what was wrong with them, and they took it all too hard and got upset with each other. My husband's mother and aunt got depressed and went to bed crying, but the next day they all made up and could see how the different personalities had all behaved in typical fashion. Amazing, isn't it? The melancholies are so sensitive, and have such a need for order that it is easy to see how they get so quickly depressed. A melancholy pastor's wife received my Personality Plus tapes from a friend who in turn sent me a copy of the thank you note. "Dear Susie, you will never know how much the tapes by Florence Littauer meant to us. They came at a very crucial time, when I, as a melancholy, had given up on ever understanding my sanguine husband. I was sick of doing all his behind-the-scenes work and having everyone tell me how lucky I was to have a husband with such personality. The whole situation was depressing. He seemed to be sensitive to everyone but me, and I was left to be the disciplinarian of the family. As I listened to the tapes, I found out why I was so easily slighted and realized that my husband wasn't out to ignore me. He just went where the audience applauded him. I analyzed the family and I found I have one child of each kind. No wonder I'm depressed. I've been trying to make them all perfect and alike. What a lot of wasted effort I've spent trying to turn sanguines, cholerics, and phlegmatics into melancholies. Your gift may have saved our home. The tapes have meant so much to us that we are circulating them in our church. Everyone is excited as they find out who they are. It's really been life-changing." Remember, a melancholy facing an imperfect life with insensitive people may become depressed. For further study, thought, and action. We know it is not God's will that we be depressed. "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine." Proverbs 17:22. Do you have a merry heart today? If not, can you pinpoint the reason? Are you a sanguine who is in a situation that's no longer fun? Where no one pays attention to you? Where you're not getting any compliments? Are there people who don't think you're funny anymore? Are you a choleric who is somehow out of control? Not full of your usual energy, unemployed, sick? Are there people who don't appreciate all you've done for them? Are you a phlegmatic who is facing conflict, who is sick of trying to mediate everyone's problems, who is tired of being ignored or made fun of? Are there some people who make you feel you're not worth a nickel? Are you a melancholy who knows nothing is ever going to get straightened out right, who hasn't asked for more than perfection, who doesn't feel anyone loves you, who can't find a doctor who can help you? Are there some insensitive people who just don't seem to understand your needs? After thinking on these questions about yourself, project them onto your mate and other members of your family. Are there times when you can see you didn't understand each other's needs and you both became depressed? If doing this as a group study, you may want to read Blow Away the Black Clouds for a more thorough study of depression. In your discussion time, let each one share what really gets him depressed and what others could do to help him. Most people would be understanding if they were only told the situation and what they could do to be of service. Hiding your problems and then being depressed when no one seems to care only isolates you from any solution. Personality depression. Sanguine, when life's no fun and there's too much criticism. Choleric, when life's out of control and there's no appreciation. Phlegmatic, when life's full of problems and there's no peace. Melancholy, when life's a mess and there's no hope. Review some basic steps in overcoming depression. Analyze your temperament needs. Admit you have a problem. Consider what you can do about it personally. Discuss your differences with your mate, children, or friend. Devise an appropriate plan of action. Write down your true feelings as David did in the Psalms. Pray to forgive those that you perceive have hurt you. Commit to changing what you do that bothers others. Ask the Lord for joy. Hitherto have ye asked nothing in my name. Ask, and ye shall receive, that your joy may be full. John 16:24. Chapter 6. Are you wearing a mask? When I first started class, Christian Leaders and Speakers seminars, in the fall of 1980, I intended to teach Christian speakers how to say it with class, but as I worked closely with the men and women who attended, I became increasingly aware of their emotional needs. As I began a study of the four personalities on a deeper level than I had ever done before, I looked beyond the obvious behavior characteristics of each temperament type and into the hurts of the hearts. I found sanguines who were depressed, cholerics who were out of control, melancholies who had given up on life, and phlegmatics who were overwhelmed by adverse circumstances. I saw women who were repeating their mother's mistakes, and men who refused to be introspective or enlightened any more than their fathers had been. Marriages of Christian leaders were falling apart, and no one seemed to be doing much about it. Currently, we find that anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of those attending class are already divorced. As I teach about the personalities, the different desires, and underlying emotional needs, lights go on and people begin to find themselves and understand why they are in their present dilemma. As Lana Batesman came on our class staff, she began an in-depth study of what she perceived to be the masks people wear to cover up their birth personality. In both our class counseling and her own Philippian ministries, Lana took note of the different types of masks, when and why people wore them, and how they could be removed. Eventually, we both started teaching Lana's concept and recording the reactions and results. As I researched the personalities of both my family and Fred's, I saw repeated patterns of behavior in areas where some of us had unconsciously stifled our natural traits in a vain effort to please a parent or partner. Some had played a part foreign to their own inborn personality and in the process had lost any sense of who they really were and any sight of who they might become. Some had put on the mask of comedy or tragedy to get applause from the crowd, and some had changed costumes so many times that they had forgotten their original identity. One day, I traced our family's personality tree on the board at class and showed how many of us strong cholerics had put on phlegmatic masks when repressed by other cholerics. Immediately, some people came up to confess that they had been wearing masks and hadn't realized what they were doing. Natural personality traits. Some people couldn't find themselves because their true God-given nature had been trampled under, had died for lack of attention, or had been masked by rejection or guilt. I began to see how childhood abuses of any kind, from emotional neglect to physical mistreatment, could warp a little one's feelings about himself and make him unable as an adult to know who in the world he really was. Some women I talk with don't have any grasp of which traits are real and which are learned. What I'm now observing in the above-average men and women we train at class is that a totally subconscious manipulation has changed them from what they were meant to be to the insecure, questioning people they are today. These are adults who have dedicated their lives to the Lord and thought they had taken off the old clothes and put on the new. Somehow, new clothes haven't been enough. But as we help them examine their personalities by looking back to what they were meant to be, the blinders fall away and they begin to see with a new light. The Bible tells us that Jesus is the vine and we are the branches, yet some of us are not connected with what we were originally intended to be. Because of adverse circumstances, lack of love, sibling rivalry, or the desire to please demanding parents, we unconsciously changed our birth personality to fit our situation. Fun-loving children were forced to get serious and keep quiet, while introverts were told to put on a happy face to be popular. Born leaders were disciplined into an unnatural submission, and those who'd rather watch were pushed into leadership. Some who stayed true to their birth personalities through childhood put on accommodating masks after marriage in order to please a mate. Let's look first at the natural traits of each temperament and how uncomfortable we feel when we try to be like someone else. Personality. When we think of someone who has a personality, we are usually referring to a sanguine, even though we may not know the term. If we enroll in image improvement lessons, we want to learn how to lose our self-consciousness, be confident before groups, be the life of the party, and ingest an instant sense of humor. There is nothing wrong with these goals, but we must realize that unless we are sanguine to start with, these traits may come across as unnatural. A melancholy may try to repeat a story he heard a sanguine tell, and wonder why no one seems to respond. A choleric may try to make jest over a person's pratfalls and appear critical. The phlegmatic, even with his natural dry wit, may twist his tongue and easily become sarcastic. Enjoy the sanguine personality, but don't be envious, for with their charm comes a lack of discipline, and they seldom reach their full potential even after receiving the ribbon most likely to succeed. I once took a charm course from a teacher who was naturally charming. She sat with her hands delicately posed and her legs crossed neatly at the ankles. While this looked fine for her, it didn't do the same for the rest of us. As I glanced around the room, it was laughable to see all of us sitting in identical positions, trying to be clones of our teacher. We should look, sit, and walk our best, but it should be our best, not a replica of someone else. Be yourself, for a phony personality is never attractive. Power. In an age where we are all stimulated to become supermen and superwomen, we are often jealous of those who seem to have it all together. Why can't we be in charge? Why don't we seem to have the power of persuasion? As a member of the National Speakers Association, I have the opportunity to spend time with some of the top motivational speakers, and I have learned that most seminars are convinced by cholerics, written by cholerics, taught by cholerics, and only the cholerics can catch the vision. The cholerics in the audience can relate to the speaker, charge forth, follow the grail, and meet the challenge. The sanguine girl who attends means well and wants to get her act together, but she can't even lift the syllabus. If she doesn't lose it on the way home, she'll put it away to look at another day, and when she can't remember where she's put it, she'll take this as a sign from the Lord that she's good enough as she is and doesn't need the book anyway. The melancholy at a seminar comes prepared with his own notebook, assorted pens, and 3x5 cards. He can follow the details and sense the direction of the speaker's 7 steps to success, but he becomes overwhelmed with the vitality of the visionary, waving his arms wildly as he yells, "Terrific!" and "Tremendous!" No one is really that terrific or tremendous, he muses. Once the melancholy senses the speaker is insincere and shallow, he loses interest in the program. The phlegmatic didn't want to go to the seminar in the first place, and he has no intention of changing his way of life. He measures all activity by how much energy it will take to succeed, and this all looks like too much work. People who are flamboyant and frequently shout, "Fabulous!" strike fear in the heart of the phlegmatic. He can't believe they are for real, and he plans to leave at the next coffee break. Enjoy the dynamic delivery and powerful confidence that is natural in the choleric, and learn what you can from his presentation, but don't get depressed if you don't desire to go out jogging at 5:30 each morning or meet Zig Ziglar at the top. Cholerics are sensational at seminars, but they aren't always a big hit at home. While speaking to a group of motivational speakers, I inserted a line that I had no intention of saying. You may be terrific and tremendous and fabulous and fantastic on stage, but you may have a sad wife at home who, if she hears one of those words again, is going to throw up. I bit my tongue as I heard those words slip out, but when I finished, a nationally known motivator came up with an uncharacteristically humble expression. Just this week, my wife said, "You may be a hot shot on the stage, but you're a zero at home. And if you say fantastic one more time, I'm going to throw up." The cleric has power in his presentation, but he needs to get off his pedestal and look into the hearts of the people. Be yourself and don't envy those leaders who seem to have it all together. Perfection. Can't you ever do anything right? How many of us have heard that as we were growing up? For the melancholy, there is no other way. As a man said to me, why would anyone want to do less than his best? And he is right. Certainly we would not aim to fail or want to do a shoddy job, but only the melancholy has the innate drive for perfection. The melancholy male must have his shoes polished, his mirror spotless, and his toothpaste tube without wrinkle. He can't possibly understand how his sanguine wife could lose her shoes, keep open jars of makeup all over the counter, and twist a tacky toothpaste tube beyond recognition. He is constantly picking up behind her, shutting doors she's left open, and putting the cap on the catsup. Fred is so neat that he has been known to fold up his clothes before putting them in the hamper. One day I took his pile of laundry to the foyer and placed it on the table while I went into the kitchen to collect the dish towels. Within a minute I came out and the laundry was gone. I assumed he had taken it to the washer, but there was no pile there. When I found him and asked what he'd done with the laundry, he replied, "I thought it was clean and I've put it away." The melancholy mind is constantly tying up the loose ends of life, and they wonder, since they are right, why the rest of us don't see it their way. The choleric is more interested in getting things done quickly than perfectly. The sanguines don't realize they haven't done it right, and the phlegmatics just don't care that much. The world needs the melancholy to keep the rest of us on track, but sometimes the standards are set so high that no one can achieve them, and then we all get depressed. Be yourself. Life is never going to be perfect. Peace. While the sanguine is running around, spreading joy unto the maximum, and the choleric is trying to get things under control, and the melancholy is dusting off the details, the phlegmatic is trying to keep peace among us all. Lana says her husband calls her a natural tranquilizer. When his choleric energy bursts into the door at night, he takes one look at her calm, cool, and collected expression, and begins to come down to earth. The heart of a phlegmatic is peaceful, and he will do anything, including compromising his principles, if he can avoid a potential problem. From the time phlegmatics were children, they had a calming influence on others, and while they may enjoy some sports, especially those on television, they do not have the competitive spirit of the choleric. Other temperaments admire the phlegmatic's ability to keep their heads when all around are losing theirs. Be yourself, and don't obliterate your personality to keep peace. As you begin to understand the truth of your personality, the Lord will show you who you were born to be, and remove any mask you may be wearing. He wants you to be yourself, for He has created you for such a time as this. Clues to masking. One of the first clues that you might not be functioning in total honesty with what you were born to be is when your personality profile comes up with relatively even splits between sanguine, outgoing, optimistic, and melancholy, introverted, pessimistic, or when you are half choleric, aggressive, active, with half phlegmatic, passive, peaceful. Since these are diametrically opposed sets of traits, these combinations indicate there may be a masking. God didn't create us with antagonistic personalities in one body. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. James 1:8. As Lana began a study of all those she counseled who had these splits, she found that the individuals with opposite scores were somehow masking their true identity. They weren't phonies in that they had determined to be something artificial, but they had unconsciously adjusted to some set of circumstances where a change was necessary for acceptance or survival. Based on Lana's discovery, our staff began to counsel with a new set of tools, and we immediately saw the results. Take, for example, the following letter I received from a woman who spent a day in counseling and prayer with George and Dennis, our class principal. So much has happened to me since I last saw you at class. I kept my appointment with George and Dennis on October 31. That was 7 weeks ago, and I think I've started another life at a different level. I talked fast enough in those 8 hours with George Ann to find 41 areas to pray about. I finally found out I am a sanguine choleric. What a shock to me, as I had always seemed to be so melancholy. Georgianne laughed when I asked her what she saw. It seems my whole foundation is choleric. God has been showing me glimpses of my childhood as this choleric kid. I never knew I was. I'm so excited. I'm having fun getting to know the real me. She said I never really had a childhood and I was dealt double whammies ever since I was born. Now Jesus is between me and all those negative memories. Praise God. I'm not out looking for someone to like me like the lost little child I was before, as I know I'm loved. Because of the difficult and repressive circumstances of this woman's childhood, she had grown up thinking she was melancholy and yet not comfortable about it. When she saw herself as she was meant to be, a sanguine choleric, she was free to be herself and get out from under the pressures of the past. The person who functions as a sanguine melancholy split has happy highs alternating with deep periods of depression. The choleric phlegmatic, on the other hand, swings in and out of controlling and submissive responses. Although many studies of the four basic temperaments, no matter what labels are used, show the sanguine melancholy and choleric phlegmatic combinations to be normal blends of people who have fluctuating extremes in their natures, we have found these conflicting traits to represent an adaptation to adverse circumstances of the past. We feel that a God who created man to live in peace of mind would not have built opposite traits into one person, causing him lifelong inner turmoil. As we sought answers to this apparent contradiction, we asked individuals with conflicting traits to review their childhood and their parents' personalities, and we soon found that one of the opposite temperaments is a mask, an unnatural veiling of the original personality. A Greek sage once said, I take the world to be put but as a stage whence net masked men do play their personage. I found that many honest Christian people are playing roles they never auditioned for, on stages they didn't design, while glued to masks they don't know how to remove. How many bewildered individuals we see who say, I just don't know who I am. We are never truly content when our inner feelings and our outer personality don't match up. When do these masks first appear? Usually we find that a child who lives in a stressful environment where his natural personality is not acceptable for one of many reasons will try to adapt to what is expected of him. He may have pain he cannot express, trauma that shocks him out of his true nature, molestation that floods him with guilt, an oppressive parent that grinds down his personality, a well-meaning but dictatorial parent who plans out his life, a favored sibling he is encouraged to emulate, unrealistic goals not suited to his abilities, or crisis situations where he has to adapt to survive. At the time he is faced with odds he can't hope to beat, he may put on an appropriate mask and play a role for which God was not the casting director. Nathaniel Hawthorne said in The Scarlet Letter, no man for any considerable period can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be the true. Maxine Bynum grew up wearing a mask of phlegmatic submission and wondered why she'd never felt right about herself. After coming to both Personality Plus and Lives on the Mend conferences and spending some counseling time with me, she wrote, I was very interested in your family tree concept with the temperaments. I've been looking back and thinking about how my grandmother influenced my temperament and actions as I was growing up, and even after my marriage when I was 19. My mother died 3 days after I was born, and my father couldn't deal with her death or with me, so he gave me to my mother's mother when I was 3 weeks old, rejecting me, and was never part of my life when I was growing up. My grandmother was a strong choleric, and I became phlegmatic to make sure I just did what she wanted, so as to win her approval and love. I couldn't stand another rejection. My grandfather died when I was about 6 years old, so I don't really remember much about him, but he was probably phlegmatic. The only times I could really be in control were the 2 summers while a college student at SMU, when I was a camp counselor and away from home for 3 months each summer. It was then that the choleric part of my temperament surfaced, and I could be in charge of a girl's cabin and tell them what to do, and I did. Except for these 2 summers, I've worn a phlegmatic mask. I'm so grateful that God has used me to help Maxine remove a phlegmatic mask that was hiding a repressed choleric nature. Now she is free to be herself without feeling she must apologize for her actions. Another lady who has been wearing the phlegmatic mask of peace wrote, I feel like a chameleon, taking on the color of each situation, trying to be all things to all people, never saying how I really feel about anything. Now I'm so mixed up, I have no idea who I really am. A man stated, I had to play one part to please my mother, and a different one to humor my father. I don't know which one, if either, is the real me. Lana tells of a woman who came to her for counsel. Joy showed me her temperament test revealing her personality to be melancholy sanguine. She was convinced that this was a true evaluation, so we did not pursue any other possibility until after she had spent a day with me in a time of emotional healing and prayer. During our counseling time together, we found that she had experienced a very painful childhood under the oppressive hand of a powerfully manipulating and controlling, melancholy choleric mother and a sadly passive phlegmatic father. The mental abuse was agonizing and left that little one totally incapable of expressing her true self. A well of pain and repression filled her heart, and a broken spirit rather than a broken will resulted. After all that pain was released in tears and prayer, a whole new flower blossomed. Joy's friend found a choleric sanguine with a heavy emphasis on the choleric, a major change from what she had originally seemed to be. What an amazing thing it is to see the real creature after the environmentally imposed facades have been stripped away. Joy is but one of many examples of those who thought they had two incompatible temperaments as the major components of their personality. Words cannot properly express the peace that comes from discovering one's true identity. Yes, what a freeing experience it is to finally know who you really are. One day after a seminar where I had put the Littauer family personality tree on the board and had explained how the cholerics in Fred's family had been forced by the preceding generation to play phlegmatic, a lady wrote me this letter. Thank you so very, very much. I feel so free. What you shared about parental influence, masking traits that show up later was such a key for me. I have yet to take the personality inventory over again with this new information in mind, but know when I do it will be much more accurate. How free the butterfly feels when it first flies out of the cocoon. Dr. James Carr, a management consultant, writes, we cultivate illusions of competency, masks, which help us to camouflage our anxieties, and the precious drive we have within us becomes obscured in compromise, complacency, and concern for immediate rather than long-range goals. What are the masks behind which so many hide? What are masks that a person puts on because he doubts his ability to handle some area of human relationships? The sanguine melancholy split. So many of us don a false front when we meet up with circumstances we can't control or relationships we can't handle. We wear masks that so gradually become a part of us that we no longer know where the mask ends and we begin. If your personality profile shows an unusual split, if you feel uncomfortable about your identity, or if you sense your offspring are confused, begin to question these conflicting patterns. Why is my teenage son melancholy at home and sanguine outside? A mother asked me after I spoke on the personalities. His friends say he's the life of the party, but he has nothing very bright to say to me. As we conversed, I quickly learned that the father was melancholy choleric and the mother melancholy phlegmatic. Neither one put much value on humor, and without realizing what they were doing, they had let the boy know his light-hearted sanguine nature was trivial and without any serious purpose. When we review the sanguine's desire to have fun and his underlying need to feel approval and want attention, we can see that this boy received neither. Brought up in a wealthy home with achieving parents and goal-oriented siblings, he just didn't fit the mold. When he found his funny stories received no applause at home, he gave up trying. Why not save your good lines for those who are appreciative of it? Don't waste your best stuff on an empty house. This boy is not a melancholy sanguine split, but a sanguine who feels depressed at home. He wears a melancholy mask caused by parents who didn't accept him as he was. He becomes his true self when in the presence of his friends who find him funny. To remedy the situation, both the mother and father would have to understand what they had done to show this boy he wasn't acceptable and begin a conscious course of affirmation and approval. The choleric phlegmatic split. A pastor's wife told me of her daughter-in-law who seemed to be a choleric phlegmatic split. Before marriage, she had seemed good-natured and willing to go along with any family plans. After marriage, she took over strongly and now does not want her in-laws to even visit or see their grandson. In tracing the girl's family background, we found a choleric mother with a phlegmatic father. The mother had disliked her in-laws and wouldn't allow them to be part of the family. The daughter had played phlegmatic at home, but upon marriage, she took over her phlegmatic husband and reenacted her mother's role, even though she didn't personally approve of her mother's domineering personality. She was subconsciously perpetuating her mother's sin and was excluding her in-laws without a valid reason. Since it was the outcast mother-in-law who came to me, a solution was not easy. She had already sat down with her daughter-in-law and asked if she had in any way offended her. The answer had been, "No, but this is just the way it's going to be." The daughter-in-law herself didn't even understand why she was laying down these rules, or see that she was patterning her marriage after the poor one her mother had produced. Her phlegmatic husband doesn't dare to cross her, and so he secretly brings the little boy to visit his mother while lying to his wife about the trip. Here is a repressed choleric who wore a phlegmatic mask at home to keep peace with her mother, married a phlegmatic, took over with a vengeance, and is now taking out her hostilities on her in-laws. This girl has to be unhappy and confused, but she doesn't see what she's doing and she is not looking for any answers. She's not only destroying the in-law relationships, which she doesn't seem to care about, but she is emotionally destroying her husband and turning him into an unwilling liar. Ultimately, her child will suffer as he lives under the overbearing dominance of his mother and the frightened submission of his father. Possible homosexuality. Unfortunately, this parental combination is one which fits the pattern of potential homosexuality. A strong mother who emasculates a weak father, who in turn provides no normal role model for the boy. Other combinations are a weak, possessive mother who binds the boy to her weeping side while the father has either left completely or is the workaholic who has no time for the family. In either case, the boy is in an emotional search for a loving father figure and is therefore vulnerable for the inordinate affections of an older male who presents himself as a genuinely caring friend. The gays I have talked to, including 7 young men in one seminary who were all training to be youth pastors, were all led into their current lifestyle by Christian leaders, scoutmasters, choir directors, youth pastors, who originally filled the void of a missing or emotionally bankrupt father. A well-meaning Christian father told me he had been so concerned about the possibility of his 10-year-old son becoming gay that he had stopped hugging or kissing him and he had pulled away from any physical contact with him. After hearing me speak on the pattern of potential homosexuality, he realized his withdrawal of affection was exactly the opposite of what he should be doing. For when a boy gets no healthy love from his father, he is open to receive it from someone whose motives may be unhealthy for the normal growth of a child. Because this subject is so seldom dealt with in the Christian community, we don't understand the enormity of this pervasive problem. As the divorce rate has risen, removing the real father from the home, so has the increase of homosexuality followed closely behind. A nurse told me of her conversation with a handsome young man in the hospital awaiting a sex change operation. She asked him openly how he got to this point. He explained that his father had left when he was a baby, and all he knew for a role model was his mother. He played with her clothes and makeup and loved feminine things. When he was in his preteens, a scoutmaster took an interest in him, and he now sees how he attached himself to this man as a father image. A nurse told me of her conversation with a handsome young man in the hospital awaiting a sex change operation. She asked him openly how he got to this point. He explained that his father had left when he was a baby, and all he knew for a role model was his mother. He played with her clothes and makeup and loved feminine things. When he was in his preteens, a scoutmaster took an interest in him, and he now sees how he attached himself to this man as a father image. The man told him, "You're too pretty to be a boy. You should be a girl." Later, this affectionate man led him into a homosexual experience. Once you've done that, you know you're not normal, and you don't feel right about yourself. I'm having this operation so I'll be on the outside what I feel on the inside. This was his way of trying to become real. As I talked with one divorced lady, raising 2 boys alone after her husband had left her for another woman, I asked her what the church could do to help her. She immediately answered, "What my boys need is for some normal Christian men to take them out occasionally to a ball game or some activity where they can see a positive male role model to make up for the rejection they feel from their father." What a service that could be for the men of your church, and how many potentially distorted lives might be spared. We first put on masks as some form of protection, and the young person who turns to homosexuality is often trying to put on a happy face over the rejection he feels from the same-sex parent, or the absence of any emotional attachment to that parent. He tries to hide his hurt and find a live substitute for their father God intended him to have. As he gets involved, he then tries to hide his activity from his mother, leading him into a guilt-producing deceptions. As we have seen, there are all kinds of masks put on initially for some kind of protection or self-preservation. Masks to hide guilt, abuse, rejection, perversion, and poor parenting. In order that we can most easily examine what mask we are wearing, or, equally important, what mask we have forced our children to wear, let's use our tool of the temperaments and divide the possibilities into 4 types. Sanguine mask. This fellow's wise enough to play the fool, and to do that well craves a kind of wit. The person who puts on the sanguine mask of personality is usually the one who learned early in life that his parents valued a happy face beyond any other attribute, and that being on stage brought approval and applause. A child does not need to know his own name before he can sense what brings affirmation from his parents. When parents, one or both, need an adorable child to bolster their own self-worth, they communicate this to the little one. I often see sanguine masks worn by melancholy musicians who are part of a performing family of gospel singers. Usually one of the parents is sanguine and is the crowd pleaser, while the other melancholy partner arranges the music and is the pianist. As the children come along, they must all duplicate the Osmonds and sparkle out front. The sanguines fall into this easily and are the favorites of the stage mother, but the others have to put on sanguine masks or be considered rebels or at least poor sports. I counseled one choleric girl who had refused to sing along and had been left home with grandparents. By refusing to wear the sanguine happy face and bang a tambourine, she had been, in effect, dismissed from the troupe who went bubbling on without her. By the time I talked with her, she was so angry at what she perceived as rejection that she had developed stomach ulcers in her teens. One of the melancholy sisters, who had been a forced sanguine for years, had gone on drugs, but the parents refused to see her problem and kept marching onward as Christian soldiers. What a shame it is to see Christian entertainers who are more interested in what's up front than what's inside. Not all sanguine masks are on performers. Many are put on unconsciously to keep someone happy. One girl with a many times married mother told me that she learned to be cute to keep her mother's varied spouses from getting mad at her. She was a choleric underneath, but learned to be a coy and adorable. By the time she was a teen, this appeal she had developed led her into being molested by one of the fathers and telling me, "I'll never be charming again, who needs it?" The difference between a born sanguine and one masquerading is how natural the personality is. Anyone can learn to say cute lines and memorize jokes, but any astute person can tell when it's strained. The real sanguine has a sense of humor that bubbles out easily, and he can take any ordinary event of life and turn it into a hilarious story. The one wearing a sanguine mask, on the other hand, doesn't have the innate sense of timing, and can fail to be funny when repeating a story exactly as he heard it. When Fred first came to visit me in our store, he saw what a comedy routine my brothers and I kept alive and tried to fit in and be like us. I'll never forget the long joke he told that seemed to go on forever. As my brothers were looking at me sideways, Fred stopped and said, "I've forgotten the punchline." And he indeed had, if there had ever been one. Now, as we have learned to accept each other as we are, he is happy for me to be funny and for him to provide the depth and stability so natural for the melancholy. In taking the personality profile, the person with the sanguine mask checks off the strengths that he has worked so hard to possess, not realizing they are acquired. If you suspect you have been forcing your fun, ask yourself how you really feel about these traits versus how you think you ought to feel. Many a mask has been thrown away by the mere asking of this question. A young journalism major listened to my tapes and realized she was wearing a sanguine mask. Her mother wrote to tell me of the relief Lynn felt when she found she could relax and be herself. Lynn has had her life changed from your insights. She now realizes that her melancholy traits are part of her natural makeup, like her dad. But she can now see her weaknesses and strengths and better understand how to make changes. Prior to this, she said that she thought there must be something wrong with her because she didn't feel comfortable being the cheerleader type and was more content to listen to others in a quieter way. Now she feels free to just be herself. Lana Bateman puts it this way: the sanguine mask is a clown's mask, demanding that its possessor be cute, funny, and constantly striving for center stage. It doesn't matter that he may not be innately humorous or sociable. This mask may take a normally quiet, sensitive person and thrust him into a very uncomfortable role of constant chatter and force him to try to become the life of the party, when in truth he may have been terrified to even appear at the door. I first saw the sanguine mask in a young woman who was 32 years old. Leanne had grown up in a home with a sister who was almost entirely sanguine. It was obvious that Leanne's older sister, Suzanne, was her father's delight. Leanne, however, was a more sensitive and quiet child. She felt deeply and therefore seemed to have more struggles as a little girl. Every time Leanne had a problem or hurt, she would run to her dad, as most girls long to do. Her father would listen to her and answer, "Oh, Leanne, why can't you just be like your sister? Why do you let things bother you? Just watch Suzanne. She knows how to handle these situations. You need to learn to laugh and be fun like her. That will take care of all these problems, and you'll find you'll have more friends than you know what to do with." Leanne lived on a steady diet of this response from her well-meaning father. This little one was soon engulfed by a sanguine mask. She tried to be cute and funny. She memorized things her sister said, jokes she heard, and any attention-getters she noticed. In spite of the fact that she tried as hard as she could to be another Suzanne for her father, she never found his words to be true. The friends he had promised never came, and while she was laughing and joking on the outside, she never stopped crying on the inside. As a melancholy child, she was never encouraged towards the strong points of her true temperament. She was covered by her sanguine mask, and by her late 20s she began to cry out, "Who am I?" After I led her through some emotional healing, she found out who the real Leanne was. It was not until then that she could accept herself and begin to function as the person God made her to be. The sanguine mask is indeed a tragedy, for it produces not joy and laughter, but pretense and loneliness. The people responding to such a mask are repelled. They hear the funny, clever words, but somehow sense the inconsistency between what is said and the person saying it. It is not surprising that the wearer of this mask experiences a great deal of rejection. Perhaps we need to look a little more closely at our sanguine friends, for some are not truly sanguines at all. Not all talkers are sanguine. Some are masquerading under a torrent of nervous chatter. Understanding this mask will better equip us to minister to that hurting heart and will keep us from pulling away when our friend genuinely needs love and wise counsel. The mask of the clown never quite seems to be true, even though a casual observer will not understand why he senses this person to be phony. It takes an effort to play a role God never intended us to fill. Jane came to class elegantly dressed and meticulously groomed. When any funny line was given, she would respond loudly and clap her hands. As I observed her, I sensed her enthusiasm was forced, and there was probably some masking of her real personality. During a break time, I asked to see her personality profile, which was scored half melancholy and half sanguine. I said nothing about the totals, but I asked her about her childhood relationships. She explained that her mother was melancholy and frequently depressed. The continual gloom weighed heavily upon Jane, and when her mother cried, she would cry also. She was so frightened that her mother might get upset again that she made a pledge: "I will never do anything that will make my mother cry." Her sanguine father would often send her to her mother's room to cheer her up. "See if you can say anything at all that will make your mother smile. If you succeed, I'll give you $1." Jane, in trying to please her father and cheer up her mother, developed the funny things to do and say. She tried to do only what would make her mother happy, and she never dared express how she really felt. As Jane told this story, I could see that she was innately melancholy like her mother and felt deeply for her mother's moods, even though as a child she was frightened by the crying. Because of her circumstances, Jane put on a sanguine mask and tried her best to make her mother smile, encouraged by dollar bills from her father. As an adult, her personality shifted in different situations. She was ill at ease with people and frequently depressed when alone. Whenever anyone was sick or discouraged, she would don the mask of the clown and endeavor to cheer them up. She was married to a sanguine like her father, who fled when she was depressed and told her to cut it out when she tried to be funny and failed. Her daughter was the one bright light of her erratic life, and she suddenly saw she was producing a confused replica of herself in her child, calling her in when she needed a lift out of her own depression as her mother had done to her. Because Jane was intelligent and wanted God's will for her life, she was able to work on her personality without further counsel. She began to emphasize her melancholy strengths and stopped her unnatural bursts of phony entertainment. Even more important was the freedom she gave to her daughter to be herself and to stop having to be her mother's dose of happiness pills as she had been for her mother. What a blessing it is when we are able to see ourselves as we were meant to be and are willing to break the cycle of artificial habits. As with any problem in life, we have to see what we're doing that's unnatural before we can make constructive changes. William Thackeray tells of the depressed patient whose theatrical profession made him wear the mask of the clown covering his true feelings. Harlequin, without his mask, is known to present a very sober countenance, and was himself, the story goes, the melancholy patient whom the doctor advised to go and see Harlequin. Melancholy Mask. The world's a stage where every man must play a part, and mine a sad one. The melancholy mask is one of attempted perfection and frequent pain. When I was first married and Fred announced he was going to put me on a training program, I was stunned. The sanguine part of me saw this would be no fun, and the choleric part didn't want to be made over. However, for self-preservation, I put on a melancholy mask of attempted perfection and tried to act out the role Fred wanted me to pursue. I played a part and knew it was a sad one. I knew nothing of the four temperaments in those days, and I accepted this unnatural role as the price of being a wife, part of growing up. What a relief it was when I found my first description of a sanguine and realized my basic personality was acceptable. I didn't have to be serious and sober to be an adult. Now as I look back on it, I functioned for all those first 15 years of marriage as a split personality. At home I alternated the melancholy mask with the phlegmatic pseudo-submission of, "Yes, Fred, dear," while in public I was being myself, directing plays, teaching speech, and being president of women's groups. As soon as I'd walk in the door, the mask would go back on and I'd hide my frivolity until I ventured out again. I was afraid if I looked too happy, Fred might think I was up to something. I love this little verse that sums me up in my early years of marriage. "I'll make my joy a secret thing, my face shall wear a mask of care, and those who hurt a joy to death shall never know what sport is there." Those who put the melancholy mask on as children were often ones with parents who demanded perfection, either because they were melancholy and knew no other way, or because their status couldn't accommodate a frisky child. I find this letter masking frequently among pastors' children whose fathers feel their whole ministry depends on the proper behavior of their children. One choleric man told me how his pastor father had insisted he be a model child, but set the choleric mother on the task of enforcing the rules. He said, "I always felt like a whipped dog with my tail between my legs. My spirit was broken early, but my repressed anger was boiling beneath the surface. I played the perfect role, and my mother praised me in public, but disciplined me harshly at home. I grew up feeling I had no personality, but now I see it was because I was playing a role foreign to my nature. I did things to scuttle my mother's plans, and as an adult, I've had to work at even liking her. When she died suddenly, I was left with a terrible guilt, because I never made peace with her. This dear man is now in therapy, trying to resolve the pains of his past and the guilt of his present, neither of which was necessary, had his parents had any realization of what changing his nature was going to do to his life. The personality profile of one pastor who came to class came out melancholy phlegmatic, but the twinkle in his eye and the bounce in his step told me he was a sanguine. As I sat down to talk with him, he asked me about his score, and I began to question his childhood behavior. His father was the pastor and his mother the organist. They made him sit in the front row and not wiggle, and they both kept a watchful eye during what he remembers as endless church services. The one statement he heard over and over again was, "Don't you dare cause any trouble." Once his father had pinned him up against a flimsy wall in the churchman's room and said, "Here's what I'll do to you if you ever cause any trouble." He then smashed his fist into the wall, going right through to the ladies' room. I knew right then and there I had better not cause any trouble. As he told me this story, his eyes got big, his voice gained volume, and he literally bounced up and down in the church pew where we were sitting. Here was a sanguine man who had been scared out of his wits as a child by a choleric father who had to appear in perfect control to his parishioners. He had never played melancholy, tried to be perfect, and wondered why he'd never felt comfortable with himself. When I asked him to think of sanguine-type actions of his childhood, he answered, "I used to go out in the fields and preach to the trees. Would that be sanguine?" As we reviewed his life together and saw repeated sanguine incidents, he began to cry, "Why did it take me this long to find out who I really am?" Before he left class 2 days later, he thanked me and said, "This freedom I feel is worth $1,000. Later he told me how his sermons had changed since he found out it was okay to be funny, and how his people have noticed a big improvement in his preaching. We will never reach the potential that is within us until we pull off the mask and become the real person God intended us to be. A sanguine tour guide from England told me a familiar story. She had married a melancholy professor who had made her over until she was wearing a melancholy mask every minute that she wasn't describing the architecture of St. Paul's Cathedral to an appreciative audience. One day, he came home and out of the blue stated that she wasn't the fun she used to be. Ultimately, he divorced her and even had the nerve to tell her that the new woman had a great sense of humor like you used to have when I married you. How often I've heard the pitiful story of a person who puts on an obliging mask for his or her mate only to be cast aside for a copy of the original model. Divorce frequently changes a person's apparent temperament. If a woman has been held under in marriage, having to wear a false front for survival, divorce often frees her to become herself. If she has not been her normal self in marriage and has been cast aside for another woman, she often puts on a sanguine mask to hide the pain and tries to become a new person who hopefully will be more successful than the last one. Besides the melancholy mask of perfection, there is the very common melancholy mask of pain. When the personality profile comes out with sanguine strengths and melancholy weaknesses, this is a clue that the person is either a melancholy wearing a sanguine mask, or a sanguine that has somewhere along the line put on a mask of pain and become depressed. Phlegmatics and cholerics may also wear this mask of pain if they have ever met with severely traumatic situations, or have lived in homes where very little love was ever expressed. When a child does not experience love by being held or touched during the formative years of birth to 8, there can be an inner unexplained feeling of rejection, even though both parents may be in the home, and this can damage his natural personality for life. When a child is abused or molested, the victim usually puts on the mask of pain, unless he is choleric enough to push away the pain, deny reality, and forge ahead to become an achiever. The victim usually loses his own feelings and drowns in depression and guilt. As adults, victims assume they have put these problems behind them and can't understand why the black cloud is always with them. They are often negative, resentful, and complaining, no matter what people do for them. It is somehow not enough. They frequently have unexplainable physical symptoms such as headaches, body pain, asthma, and allergies. Sometimes in extreme sexual abuse cases, they have blocked out the original attack and can't understand why they always feel guilty for something. Whether the cause was trauma or lack of love, the person wearing the mask of pain needs help in releasing these past problems. For some, sitting down with a patient and compassionate friend who will listen may be enough to peel away the mask. Some may need a pastor or counselor who will work with them over many months. We have seen miraculous results when Lana or any of her Philippian Ministries counselors spends a day in searching the memories, praying intensively over the past pains, and healing the hurts through God's almighty power. Lana tells her own story. My life is an excellent example of the melancholy mask. I grew up in a home where well-meaning parents did not know how to express physical affection and were not able to effectively communicate with children. There was no abuse of any kind. I was left with a deep longing for love, and that need, eventually distorted, drove me to emotional bankruptcy. It turned me into a totally negative child and adult. Those who knew me would have declared me a 100% melancholy, at least where all of the weaknesses were concerned. That is a key for discerning the melancholy mask, which expresses itself through the melancholy weaknesses rather than strengths. The longing for love which produces the melancholy facade cannot be overstated, for it crushes many of our children and leaves them licking their wounds rather than leading productive lives. One who unwillingly wears the melancholy mask will often show an expression of deep pain, hurt, or deadness in the eyes. When I was speaking in California, I met a young man who responded to my description of a melancholy mask. He came to me after I had spoken that evening and described the feeling he had experienced while I was speaking. He said, "I've had everything a man could ever want in life. I graduated from a large university as an all-American football player. I was the athlete of the decade in that university. I married a Miss Universe. I own my own bank and a trust company, and I'm a prosperous man. But I have never been happy." When you were sharing your childhood and the melancholy mask you wore, I found myself 5 years old again. My dad had lost his temper with me and told me to go out into the woods. He said, "Don't you ever come back." I was terrified out there, alone. I cried and cried. The sun went down and it got very dark, and still no one came. I can't tell you the terror I felt as such a little boy. I knew I'd never see home again. At last, late into the night, someone came to rescue me. I guess I'll never forget that night. When you started talking about your childhood, I found myself wandering in those woods again, lost and afraid. I think I've been there all my life, and I wonder if I'll ever come out. This was a gentleman who wore the melancholy mask. His life was permeated by pain of his childhood, and the pain was produced by far more than one frightening incident in the woods. Until this man could work through that deep hurt and fear, releasing the accompanying emotion, the world would see him as a melancholy rather than the choleric sanguine he truly was. And not until then would he be able to leave the prison of his mind and rest in the productive and humorous person God created him to be. What a glorious transformation comes when one can cease striving and find freedom in God's original design for life. Choleric mask. Boldness is a mask for fear, however great. In our modern American society, power denotes success. We see magazine articles giving us the secrets to happiness and health, prosperity, and wealth. Everybody wants to be somebody, and the somebodies all seem to be choleric. These powerful people are earning their livings by showing people with no power how to get it. The diploma from success courses could well be a choleric mask of power. Unfortunately for many who get caught up in the 10 easy steps from wimp to wonderful, a mask is all they have. They don't suddenly acquire a longing for the 18-hour workday, and the simple stairway to the stars seems to have no end. I often talk to phlegmatic men who have had choleric masks of power put on them by eager mothers or aggressive wives, whose own self-worth will rise proportionately with their husband's income. The man feels he's on a treadmill to nowhere, and when he adds up the personality profile, he is half choleric, half phlegmatic, and frequently depressed. A phlegmatic with a choleric mask and a lack of understanding of the temperaments is a very discouraged person. He's trying to be dynamic without the drive. He's trying to be aggressive when his nature is passive, and he doesn't have a clue as to why he's killing himself and not becoming president. What relief comes over the phlegmatic when he finds out he doesn't have to be a choleric. He can drop the phony, backslapping personality that has turned people off and become the pleasant, agreeable, and witty peacemaker he was designed to be. Bill came to class as an aggressive choleric who was depressed. In counseling, we found he was a sanguine who had been told by his father that real men were serious and high achievers. He tried to become what he thought he ought to be, and even though he was popular in the family business, he knew he wasn't what his father wanted. After listening to our teaching on the temperaments, he suddenly saw he was a depressed sanguine, struggling to keep on a choleric mask of power. Alicia came thinking she was choleric, but not showing any of the true signs of overt leadership. In talking with her, we found a melancholy girl whose phlegmatic mother had been sickly, and whose sanguine father had taken off with a healthier model. Alicia called him her runaway father and branded him irresponsible. Because there was no one in charge at home, she had to take control and hold things together for her mother and younger sister. By practicing the actions of a nature not her own, she became an obsessively controlling adult and had a constant fear of losing the control she'd worked to develop. Alicia married a sanguine choleric man, the opposite of her true temperament, and they battled for control. She was not about to give up until she got her first glimpse of the four personalities at class and began to see the choleric mask she had been wearing. Once she realized where her unnatural choleric had come from and why she didn't need to fight for control anymore, she was able to relax and slowly become the easygoing person God had intended her to be. Besides the mask of power that makes any temperament appear to be an ill-at-ease choleric, there is a related mask of anger. Any person who represses anger over a long period of time can appear to be choleric when the cork blows and temper tantrum surprises those in view. Often a phlegmatic who keeps all his feelings under wraps will put on a choleric mask of anger when he sits behind the wheel of a car. He can vent his anger on other drivers and shake his fist at traffic lights. When he gets to work, he often puts the mask away with his coat and doesn't put it on again until he hits the freeway at night. Often we spot a choleric mask when a person has choleric weaknesses and strengths of another type, indicating valid strengths paired with controlled anger. This person may be working under extreme stress, where he is helpless to do anything about it, or he may have had a repressive childhood causing him to fight for survival. As he grew up, the anger produced impatience, bossiness, and an argumentative nature that so overshadowed his strengths that he appeared to be choleric. Extreme cases like this would be the person who handles his emotion at work, and then one day murders his wife. Everyone is in shock as he seemed like such a nice man. Rapists and molesters are often low-key people who are carrying inside them the residue of an abusive childhood that comes out in violent acts. Lana tells of a charming performer who came to class. Brian had taken the personality profile and scored about 80% choleric and 20% sanguine. We found he did not know his real father, but his mother had remarried when he was 5 years old. His stepfather was mentally ill and would sometimes threaten to kill the boy's mother, occasionally even getting a gun and aiming it at her. The little boy's response was to pick up a stick or a rock or a gun in order to protect his mother. He was drawn into the adult world of emotions and responsibilities through the sick relationship of his parents, yet he derived none of the benefits of that world, for when he would try to protect his mother, the stepfather would beat him unmercifully. The product of such a distorted childhood is not hard to imagine. As Brian became a teenager, he had to find a place to express this terrible churning inside of him, this repressed rage and sense of injustice. He found release on the athletic field where his aggressiveness knew no limit, causing him to get his letter in virtually every sport in the school offered. It was not until this man faced himself honestly and released this inner rage through counseling and prayer that he was able to rest in his real and God-given personality. Once the pain was poured off, a new temperament was discovered. This man was 80% sanguine and only 20% choleric. What freedom came when he understood what God had created him to be. His response? I can't tell you how many questions this answers for me. I feel a peace I can't begin to describe. Because Brian is now a friend of our class family, I can joyfully attest to the changes in him, which now have also produced a restoration of a shaky marriage. Now both his career and his ministry for the Lord are on the rise. Many times we have found pastors who had repressed anger because they had been pushed into being pastors by their families and had not known how to say no. They were all godly men, but were in the wrong calling. One explained to me, my mother told me from the time I was little, we've had 6 generations of preachers in this family, and you're it. She nicknamed him Rev as a child, and he seemed to have no options in his life. Two of the pastors, when they realized why they had physical manifestations of their controlled anger, decided to leave the clergy for more appropriate careers. Another, after freeing himself from having to be a pastor, decided, now that he had a choice, that's really what he wanted to be. In all three cases, the pent-up anger has been relieved, and the men feel at ease with themselves and are in better health. Phlegmatic Mask. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Psalms 55:21. The phlegmatic mask is often the result of someone who gives up on life and becomes apathetic, deciding it's easier to mouth agreeable words than to fight for what's right. Cholerics who can't win in a given situation may put on a phlegmatic mask of peace and pretend they don't care. Sanguines who marry mates who no longer think they're cute may turn to phlegmatic at home and save their humor for social occasions. Melancholies who sense no one cares just won't bother to even communicate anymore. A choleric girl told me she had two choleric parents who so overwhelmed her as she was growing up that she realizes now she played phlegmatic just to stay alive. She remembers, "There were no additional opinions needed, and I was raised by the saying, 'Children are to be seen and not heard.' I didn't know I had anything to say until I went away to college." Even though she had no understanding of the temperaments, she married a phlegmatic, the opposite of her natural choleric, and soon found herself having to make decisions for both of them. After hearing me speak, she suddenly saw her personality pattern and later wrote me, "Now that I'm working on removing my mask, I shift back and forth. When my phlegmatic husband wants to stay home, my choleric says, 'I'll go anyway.' But then I sink back to phlegmatic and mutter, 'What's the use, and who cares anyway?'" A teenager whose mother told me he was phlegmatic asked if I'd do the personality profile with him while I was visiting in his home. The more we conversed, the more sanguine he became. I asked him why his mother felt he was phlegmatic, and he replied, "My whole family is sanguine choleric, and they are all talking at the same time and bossing each other around. It's a lot easier to keep quiet, play phlegmatic, and stay out of trouble." A melancholy doctor explained, "By the time I get home at night, I have no heart to buck my sanguine wife's ideas, ridiculous though most of them are, so I keep my mouth shut, nod often, and say, 'Yes, dear,' once an hour, whether I agree or not. I guess you'd call that playing phlegmatic." One evening, I went out to dinner with a family who seated me next to their 25-year-old son who had moved home after a divorce. "We can't get a thing out of him. Maybe he'll talk to you." Once they'd given me my assignment, they all started talking at their end of the table. I asked the young man how he felt about himself. For over an hour, he told me his life story. His parents were both professionals, one choleric sanguine, one choleric melancholy, and as long as he could remember, they'd always worked. They always gave me everything I needed, but never had time to listen. Now that they're trying to pump me for information, I'm not going to tell them anything. Later, his mother asked, "What did you do to ever make him talk so much? We can't get a thing out of him." As I opened my mouth to answer her question, she changed the subject, and I could see why this sensitive, melancholy boy had not bothered to share his feelings. Who really cared? Often when children grow up with scrapping parents, they take on the role of peacemaker or mediator, no matter what their own personality was meant to be. Lana tells of a girl she counseled with this type of background. Sherry came to me several months after taking the personality profile, and she was very confused. The only temperament she thought might adequately describe her was the phlegmatic, and yet she had many checks in the other columns as well. I couldn't come up with a logical answer until a year later when she had thought her life over and she realized that she had indeed taken on the false responsibility for not only her parents' happiness but also for keeping peace in the home. This need had permeated every area of her life and had masked her true temperament, which was sanguine choleric. When she was able to reject that unnatural sense of false responsibility and stop being all things to all people, Sherry's real personality began to clearly emerge. The fun-loving, sanguine part of her expressed itself more freely. and the choleric became obvious as she began to verbalize her need for order and for quick responsiveness to her leadership. Once more, we see the results of finding one's true self and removing undesired pretenses, free to be what God created her to be. Sherry is now joy and delight. Her spiritual and emotional growth is marked by a new reality of her true strengths and weaknesses, as the distortions have been properly put away. There is a fine line between the phlegmatic mask of peace and the one of apathy, when the person gives up on life and just doesn't care anymore. Carried to an extreme, this person could become catatonic, unable to express himself at all. One young girl who had developed severe emotional problems told me that she was two different personalities. Because her home life with an abusive stepfather and weeping mother was so traumatic, she learned to literally tune out and shut down any feelings or emotion. This repression had caused her headaches, and she only felt good when she was away from home. In going over her personality profile with her, I found she was a choleric who had put on the phlegmatic mask of apathy and was out of touch with reality. Her comment on our meeting was, "As you talked, I realized all these years I had been covering my true God-giving personality with a phlegmatic mask. That's the reason I was struggling with two people. Now that I know this, I have taken home the real me. I'm claiming my true personality and celebrating the freedom. My family won't know how to deal with me. They haven't seen me for so long, but as I explain the change, I hope they'll learn to love and accept me." Since Lana first started teaching the masking concept at class, we've had hundreds of people who have found out why they didn't know who they were. What a joy it is to take off the mask and find the real you underneath. How exciting it is to me when I receive a letter like this one that says, "You just saved a life. Mine." 2 months have passed since you presented class here in the Seattle area. Little did I realize how transforming that experience would be. My parting comment to you that snowy day was, "You just saved a life. Mine." And those words are a living testimony daily. How desperate I was, in need of unlocking the prison of myself hidden behind a concrete mask that covered me from head to toe. Your material on temperaments revealed gaping discrepancies. Once shattered by truth, the real me God created is slowly emerging. A miracle continues to unfold, bringing healthy and wholeness. God bless. Marvell Berglund. For further study, thought, and action. In Psalm 51:6, David states, "You desire truth in the inner parts." And in Psalm 19:12, he asks, "Who can discern his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults." As we meditate over these verses, let's realize that God does want us to know who we really are. He wants us to discern that original child within us and get rid of any masks or pretenses we may have been hiding behind. In reading this chapter, has the Lord shown you any masks you've been wearing? What are they? When did you first adopt a behavior pattern that was not how you really felt inside? Can you see how this mask warped your original personality? Do you or any family members wear the sanguine mask of personality, sanguine mask of clown, melancholy mask of perfection, melancholy mask of pain, choleric mask of power, choleric mask of anger, phlegmatic mask of peace, phlegmatic mask of apathy? If you're doing a group study, review these different masks, noting that the second of each type is the more serious. The sanguine mask of personality, a phony charm, is insincere but carried to an extreme. The individual trying to play the fool becomes ludicrous. The melancholy mask of perfection may start as the only way to get along with a demanding parent or mate. But eventually the person is so full of pain and rejection that he can no longer see himself objectively at all. The choleric power may be a learned response to situations that demanded decisions, but the mask of anger is like a cork pushed down into a bottle. Under heat it may explode. The phlegmatic mask of peace never seems to bother others, but if it becomes a lifelong cover-up, it will lead to feelings of apathy, where real emotion is totally suppressed. An example of this anesthesia over feelings comes from a girl who had a nervous breakdown, was put in a mental hospital, and played the game she called, "I'm okay," just to get out. She wrote, "When I started coming apart at the seams, I put on a mask. In counseling, I couldn't open up, share, or be honest. I've done this so long I pretend with everybody. I've developed the attitude, I don't care whether you understand me anymore. I have no feelings at all. How about you? Do you have feelings you can't express? Start sharing with someone today. Pull off your mask and find out who you really are. Personality masks. Sanguine, personality, clown. Choleric, power, anger. Phlegmatic, peace, apathy. Melancholy, perfection, pain. Oh, what a tangled web we weave, when first we practice to deceive.